With the release of Spider-Man 2 on PC, I felt a huge urge to dive back into one of the best Spider-Man games ever, where our friendly neighborhood hero has to face his arch-nemesis in a city overrun by symbiotes, turning people into monsters, and you have to save whoever you can. Of course, I'm talking about Spider-Man, Web of Shadows. This almost 20-year-old gem was released by Activision in 2008, about 2 years after the PlayStation 3 launched. Its release was a bit messy, with the game getting a ton of low scores. To my bad luck back then, I still had a PlayStation 2 and could only dream of playing it. I spent countless afternoons watching gameplay videos, thinking that anyone who got to play it was the luckiest person alive. I heard there was a version for the PS2, but I quickly found out it wasn't even 1% of the real thing. For some reason, they used to make multiple versions of games with the same title back then. Fast forward a few years, around 2014, I don't remember exactly, I finally managed to buy a PlayStation 3 and thought, alright, it's time. But guess what? The game wasn't available on the PlayStation Network for download, and I couldn't find a physical copy anywhere. And it wasn't just this game. Some other Spider-Man titles I'd heard about were also impossible to find. It was like they never existed. So, after a long 10-year wait, at the end of 2024, I finally built a gaming PC and immediately started researching how to play it. Now, kids, piracy is always wrong. Never pirate a game, even if the only way to play it is through an emulator for an old console and a copy downloaded from a site dedicated to preserving games that might otherwise be lost to time. As a PC newbie, I had to do some digging to figure out how to make it work, but man, when I finally got it running, I had the time of my life. The story starts with the famous, depressed Spider-Man meme. You get a taste of the gameplay with some tutorial tips, all the upgrades unlocked, and New York City in its most advanced stage of symbiote infection. The beginning of the game is a bit confusing because Spider-Man blacks out twice in a very short time frame. Like, how many times is this guy gonna pass out? But soon enough, the story actually starts, like for real this time. The story of this game is pretty humble. It doesn't dive into deep themes or throw any mind-blowing plot twists at you. After you complete some activities like beating up gang members and you start to feel a little bored, the story throws something new at you. Yeah, the beginning is a bit repetitive, but we'll get there. Trust me, the storytelling in this game really shines because of the variety of characters and the bold choices the creators made. I mean, can you imagine a modern game being this daring? Like, giving us a fight between Spider-Man and a symbiote-controlled Wolverine? That's wild. Not only that, but the game throws a ton of symbiote-modified villains and goons at you, and once that starts happening, the game becomes an absolute blast. The player choices in this game were also a standout feature, something you'd rarely see in a Spider-Man game today. You get to decide how to resolve certain conflicts and how to treat certain characters.
Felicia, you in there? Here, kitty, kitty, kitty.
I'm right here, you idiot.
Early on, our beloved Black Cat makes a questionable proposal, but let's be real, she's a great negotiator. According to her, she was trying to prove that she and Spider-Man were made for each other.
Fun is just
She was working undercover for the Kingpin, but as usual, something went wrong.
It looked like it hurt.
Around this point in the game, you encounter the first flying enemies, and they're one of the highlights of the game. What I've never understood is, why don't other Spider-Man games have this combat system? Sure, it's not perfect. Sometimes you'll be kicking air like a goofball instead of landing hits. But once you get the hang of it and start pulling off combos, the game feels amazing. The developers seemed really proud of this combat system, and it's the game's signature feature. You can web strike enemies, punch them, jump to the next one, pull off a combo or two, and repeat, all while staying airborne. The only time you touch the ground is when you mess up or drag someone down with you. Another awesome feature is the wall combat. You can fight enemies on walls, parry attacks, shoot webs, and even throw enemies off. Sure, the moves can get repetitive after a while, but when you combine all the ways you can beat up bad guys in this game, it creates a truly immersive Spider-Man experience. It really makes you feel like you're thinking and acting like him. When you're in the classic red and blue suit, Spider-Man is more agile. You get web-based combos, the ability to wrap enemies in webs, and even unlock a web-based Kamehameha. Yes, you heard that right. But with the press of a button, you can switch to the black symbiote suit, and the gameplay changes completely. Now you're using symbiote powers, slamming tentacles into groups of enemies, and throwing the symbiote itself at people. You also feel way stronger. For example, wall combat feels totally different depending on the suit. In the classic suit, Spider-Man is super acrobatic, almost like he's breakdancing on the walls. But in the black suit, your punches create shockwaves that damage nearby enemies. It's so cool. The game also has a ton of destructibility, and it's incredibly satisfying. Like when an enemy knocks Spider-Man across the street, he bounces off the ground, slams into a car that explodes, and then gets back up in a super heroic pose. Or when you throw cars at giant robots, triggering a QTE that lets you finish them off with ease. Though I'm sure the city's insurance companies aren't too happy about all the property damage.
What a surprise! An evil henchman!
All of this comes together to create a combat system and overall atmosphere that's explosive, stylish, and downright cinematic. At times, it feels like you're watching a Spider-Man movie. During combat, cars sometimes explode with civilians inside, and you can save them midair while dodging explosions and fighting enemies. It's super cinematic and incredibly rewarding when you actually pull it off. Now, let's talk about the camera. The camera in this game is like its own character with a mind of its own. The lock-on system is extremely confusing. Sometimes it locks onto an enemy blocks away when you're just trying to focus on the guy right in front of you. Or when you're trying to save a civilian, you accidentally trigger spider sense and end up targeting the wrong thing. It's frustrating, and I'm not sure if it's something you can master or if it just comes down to luck. Either way, it's a love-hate relationship. As we move further into the story, we see some civilians going full feral mode and attacking Spider-Man. And what does our brilliant hero do? He decides to throw them off the top of a building, right in front of the police. I don't know what he was thinking, but there were so many other ways to defend himself and contain the infected without, killing them in front of the cops. Enter Wolverine, who shows up to sniff us out and casually mentions that Spider-Man smells a lot like the symbiote-infected civilians. This part is actually pretty cool because it throws in some trivia questions that don't really change anything, but it's your chance to prove you're a true Spider-Man fan. This game makes it crystal clear that Spider-Man lives in a shared universe with a ton of other Marvel characters. For example, S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up to try and contain the infection. Black Widow treats us like we're part of the problem. Moon Knight scolds us for throwing those infected people off the roof, and Luke Cage is out here protecting Mary Jane. Not only do we see these characters, but the world itself is packed with Marvel references. There are billboards for Iron Man and the Fantastic Four, references about Iron Fist, and even an Easter egg about the Superhuman Registration Act on a newspaper stand. Honestly, if they expanded on this Easter egg in the next game, Spider-Man might as well sell his soul to the devil. These little details make the game feel rich and connected, creating a fun and immersive atmosphere. It's a stark contrast to Marvel's Spider-Man, where we have a giant Avengers Tower in the middle of the city, but when things go down, they're nowhere to be seen. Sure, it's probably due to licensing issues. Insomniac doesn't have the same freedom Activision had back in the day. But still, it's one thing to try and include references and another to have characters just showing up and blowing your mind. Of course, the game doesn't rely solely on references or special guest appearances. It also has some iconic moments that stand on their own. One of my favorite parts of the game is when we chase Electro. Dude, it's literally like that scene from the Amazing Spider-Man 2 movie. If you put the two side by side, you wouldn't be able to tell which is which. Also, I don't know what they did here, but the city feels huge. I didn't get the same feeling playing Marvel's Spider-Man 2018, but in this game, swinging through the city and chasing enemies makes it feel massive. Maybe it's just me, but I swear the scale feels different. And no, it's definitely not because of the graphics. Speaking of graphics, in this game they are pretty simple, bearing in mind this is an early PlayStation 3 game. It is good as far as I can tell. The character models, on the other hand, sometimes are so uncanny, especially the early infected people. But it does kind of feel that it should be disturbing anyway, so it's okay for me.
Fun. You do like fun, don't you?
The streets and the alleys have almost no shadow, which is very strange to a game named Web of Shadows. It's strange because everywhere you go is so enlightened and washed out, even when there's some neon sights just around the corners. You don't quite get the feeling that you should when you go through an alley or stand in a secluded spot. I think it was because of the graphical limitation, but the first Assassin's Creed was released just a year before, and that bad boy had way better shadows than this one. But aside of that, the city is pretty well designed. Everything feels functional and believable. The web swinging system in this game is a piece of cake. When you swing directly into a building, you can pull off a wall jump animation and keep your momentum going. There are two variations of this. One where you keep moving forward, using the wall to gain speed, and another where you can completely change direction. You can even just hang out on the wall for a bit, which looks pretty cool. And when you're swinging close to buildings or the ground, there's an animation where Spider-Man runs while holding onto the web. It's these little details that make the movement feel so fluid and dynamic. The controls here are deeper than they seem. You've got a button for running, another for wall crawling, and yet another for web swinging. This system is incredibly satisfying and gives you a real sense of progression as you master it. The freedom the game gives you is unmatched, and it's one of those rare games where you can just lose yourself in the movement. Sometimes I catch myself just swinging around the city, stopping to punch a few bad guys here and there, and the flow state I get into is enough to keep me hooked for hours. It's like the game wants you to feel like Spider-Man, and honestly, it nails it. From this point on, the city starts to fall deeper into infection, and Spider-Man needs all the help he can get, from allies and enemies alike, to clean up this mess. The companion system in this game is very creative. It changes depending on your choices during the game. You can have different allies depending on the choices you make. You can even break Rhino free and have him helping you on the streets, as both of you charge against the infected. Another cool addition was Electro. After you defeat him, you can say,
That thing took your sister.
and you will be able to have his help as well. Another unlockable allies are Vulture, Luke Cage, and Black Cat. This system was definitely not something I was expecting at all in a Spider-Man game, but it is actually pretty fun. Swinging through the city, you'll notice it's completely different from the start of the game. It's emptier, destroyed, and feels like a war zone. Police and SHIELD agents are fighting infected and saving civilians. One of the most memorable missions for me was protecting civilians on a rooftop, while infected climbed up the sides to get them. That's peak Spider-Man action right there. Moving on, the Tinkerer comes up with a plan to build a high-frequency bomb to wipe out the symbiotes for good. But of course, Venom isn't having it, and we get an epic showdown on SHIELD's helicarrier. After a boss fight against a Venom that looks like it came straight out of God of War, seriously, it's like fighting the Hydra, we're given a choice between two endings. Kill Venom, tame the symbiote, and rule the city with Black Cat, or let him sacrifice himself to end the plague. Obviously, on a first playthrough, most people go for the good ending. But the fact that a Spider-Man game even gives you this choice is fascinating. Some companies are afraid to explore what we'd do if we were in our hero's shoes, but this game confidently imagines what it would be like if we could make those decisions. The game almost had a wild feature where the black-suited Spider-Man could go rampage mode across the city, turning him into a public enemy with a GTA-style wanted system. But it was cut last minute. Honestly, it kind of makes sense, since in the bad ending, the heroes team up to hunt you down with a symbiote-controlled Wolverine.
Bring me Spider-Man, dead or alive.
Imagine Spidey getting chased by a bloodthirsty Logan.
I'm going with dead.
This concept was so good it deserves a whole game. Sadly, the game didn't sell well, and Shaba Games shut down a year after release. But Chris Schultz, the co-founder, said he was super proud of the team's work. Web of Shadows was their most ambitious and complex project ever. And honestly, I'd say they nailed it. Rest in peace, Shaba, but your Spidey game still slaps. The game received pretty low scores from review sites and even users back in the day. Most of them were saying the game felt repetitive and half-used. I really can understand them because it feels you got to be in the right mood to enjoy it. Over time, people have come back to it with a newfound appreciation. Sure, some things were lacking. The controls were a bit clunky and the camera had a mind of its own. But despite its flaws, this game left a mark on a generation. It clearly inspired Spider-Man 2 for the PlayStation 5, and many players hold a special place for it in their memories. For me, it's definitely my favorite Spider-Man game, imperfections included. I miss the days when games took more risks in the name of fun, instead of playing it safe to sell more copies. It feels like creative freedom isn't as prominent today, and developers are stuck working within very safe boundaries. What about you? What did you think of the game? Which classic should I revisit next? Let me know in the comments.
Spider-Man.